Welcome to the Rice Cooker. I'm Susanna Isley, and today is story time. I'm going to give you a little rundown about the generalities of my life. Just like a quick little, I don't know how long it will be. I am the youngest of 5, born in Colorado at home. All my sisters were accidentally born at home, and my brothers were born in the hospital. It goes boy, girl, girl, boy, me. They are all 2 years apart, and then I'm 7 years younger, but we have the same mom and dad. So that's interesting. We grew up very different. I mean, considering we're almost a decade apart. They grew up with both my parents together. My parents had been married about 18 years when I was born, I believe. And when I was born, 6 months later, my dad took off to Atlanta. It was very common for my parents to move all the time. Some say that my dad was a con artist. They were in all these very strict churches. And my older siblings describe them as cult-like, some of them. And my dad would very commonly con the people in churches into giving them all his money or their money to start different endeavors that he wouldn't start, and then they would move to another area or church. So my mom didn't work. She was at home and she homeschooled all the kids. She also sewed all of their clothes down to their underwear. Nothing was store-bought ever for them. And she grew a big garden and canned, and that's mostly what they ate. I guess at one period of time, they owned like a hog farm. I just know my sister talks about hating that and how the hogs ate before them, and she just hated the hogs. So I don't know how long that went on, but they were together 18 years. And when I was born 6 months later, my dad told my mom to once again pack the whole house up and send it with him. He was going to go out to Georgia and find a job. And she didn't hear from him again for 2 years. So she was left with unpaid rent, 5 kids, a 6-month-old baby. She had to get in for emergency gallbladder surgery right about the same time she was finding this or figuring this out, that he wasn't getting a hold of her, like right after he left. So she had her gallbladder surgery, and I went to live with some lady from the church who breastfed me. So my mom was just a survivor, and carried a lot of trauma from that. And I don't know if there's pieces of that she'll ever be able to let go. It's really carried through into her life, and really prevented her from ever feeling abundant. After some time, we were living over by Denver side of Colorado, and my grandparents had a ranch on the western slope of Colorado, very near the Utah border, and about an hour and a half or something from the Utah border. And so eventually Grandma and I think maybe one of the aunts came over, and they picked up my mom and all the kids and moved us to this little town where my grandparents live called Natarita. So we started living with them. My mom got into nursing school, and she would drive 2 hours one way to go to school every day. And I'm thinking that's about the time my sisters and brothers had maybe got to go to traditional school. I don't know if they were still homeschool. I don't think she was homeschooling them at that point. But so about this time, like this when I'm about 2, my mom is now going to school, or I guess a little bit younger than that, in Grand Junction, which is a 2-hour drive from where my grandparents' ranch was. And yeah, eventually we got into some low-income housing over there. And so she didn't have to drive anymore. And then we eventually, I think about the time, maybe I was like 4, 5-ish, she had a friend, his name was Clay, and we got into a house that was by the college. And it was probably 800 square feet, 3 bedrooms, very tiny bedrooms, very small house. And I remember Clay built us triple high bunk beds for the middle room, and that was our room. So by the time we were in the Kennedy house, the sisters and brothers were going back and forth. My oldest brother, Aaron, lived mostly out with my dad. I don't really remember him living with us. So I think he moved about the time we were in the low-income housing. So I was like 2-ish, maybe. And then I didn't see him again until I was 16. So he always lived with my dad. I always lived with my mom. The 3 middles went back and forth. What happened for like most of my childhood is I just remember them coming back and forth, and I always hated when they would leave because I would feel so alone. And I always felt like they had each other, and I didn't have anybody. It was interesting because it's like they were my sisters and brothers, but they were more almost like parents. They all felt, and I think they kind of felt it too, like this need to take care of me versus how people feel with their siblings, of like that connection that they're in it together. I very much was never part of their, my sisters always had each other, and yeah. But anyway, so we had these triple high bunk beds, and my mom would often rent out the other 2 rooms to other college kids, and she would sleep on the couch to be able to afford for us to live there. We had a big yard, and we were little heathens that just rode our bikes everywhere, and yeah, just a little. There was really cool neighbors on the street. I remember growing up, and there was a lady that lived across the street who loved to help, or loved to have me come, and I would help her like transplant her flowers and do all sorts of yard work with her. She had a daughter that lived with her, like an adult daughter, and I spent a lot of time with them. There was apartments right across the street. I remember a lot of, like, they must have been Japanese foreign exchange students. I think it was one of those programs, like a sister school with the college that was there. Because I just remember as a child, different little Japanese kids being my friends, and sometimes they would not speak any English, and they would be teaching me Japanese, and I would be teaching them English as we would play together. I had a neighbor to the left named Michelle, and her family was very Christian, but it was like wild Christian, because I remember going to their church, and they were the type that like laid hands on you, and people, oh, and they would say that there would be all these healings supposed, and the pastor would like lay hands on people and they would pass out and shake and say they were healed of all this stuff and oils, and I just so knew I could not tell my mom what was going on at this church, and it felt so fun to me. I just loved going there. And I always had really severe migraines growing up. So I remember asking them to pray over me. And then at some point, I remember everyone would eventually fall. And there would be like these people behind them that would catch them. And I remember at one point asking them to like pray over me because I wanted to not have migraines anymore. And they laid their hands on me, and I just waited and waited and waited, and like nothing ever happened. And eventually the pastor pushed me over, and I was like, okay. I don't know, it was just the most wild experience, but people were very passionate about this, and it was this I thought it was cool. So I was, getting raised Baptist and very traditional, or I don't know if it's considered traditional, but it was like just, very strict about if we could even have music on, it had to just be classical music or hymns, sing hymns. Or I was allowed to listen to, what was it called? Patch the Pirate. Which was so fun because it was like these stories, this like pirate that went all over, but they were like Bible stories. And then they had songs like, okay, here's an example of one of the songs. And I love this. Once a bird from Tijuana named her little son Manana, 'cause he put off till tomorrow what he should have done today. Everybody say, do it now. Don't delay. Don't put it off till another day. Go ahead, begin it right this very minute. You better do it now. Okay, so that's like, I was, that's probably why I'm so musically inclined. Thank you, Patch the Pirate. Such wholesome, for the wholesome childhood music collections. Check them out if you want. I'm sure they're still around in some capacity. Anyways, yeah. So I guess, we were super poor. That is one thing that was definitely a theme. My mom was going to college. She always worked 2-3 jobs, like as many jobs as she could, all the way through school. She started nursing school when I was like 2, got herself all the way and graduated as a nurse practitioner, which is like 2 years from being a doctor, but they can write prescriptions and stuff like that. She graduated as that when I was a junior in high school. But I think she graduated from nursing school when I was about, I wonder if it was about like first grade? Maybe between like kindergarten and second grade. I was young. Then she nursed for a long time, worked for a cardiologist and stuff. Where was I? Yeah, so we grew up poor, and I just remember she would pick up cleaning jobs. And so I started cleaning with my mom when I was about 5. I started when I was about in kindergarten, and we would clean salons after they were closed at night, or offices. She got us in like medical offices and other offices. But I mostly remember the salon, and I was always like the duster. So I would dust everything, and I don't know what my brothers and sisters' jobs were. I just remember they had jobs, but mine was dusting. So I'm an exceptional duster in case, I never need that. I don't really even dust my house. I'm more of like, now I just like, that's good, right? Just like blow it off. Maybe I did enough dusting in my life. I'm done with that. No. Like dust, I suppose. No, not really. Um, and another one I remember is we would do this lady's house it must have been the weekends. And she would pay me like a bonus. I remember getting a bonus and it was like 10 cents every time. And I did all the dusting and she had a ton of knickknacks in, you know, china cabinets behind glass. And I did every knickknack and I did all the pretty things. And I got to look at all her pretty things. And then I would take her out in a wheelchair and I'd push her around. She lived in one of those, maybe they were like condos or something, and there was all these paths. And well, my mom, after I finished my dusting, then I could take and push her around. And she was so kind to me, and it was really fun to be around her. And what else? I got to spend all my school breaks, all of my summer breaks, like every break we had from school. Once I got into school age, I spent at my grandma's ranch in Natarita, and I loved it. And I mean, I would be there the day school was done and home the day before school started, and I would cry and cry and cry. I did not want to leave my grandma's house. It was heaven on earth. And she was so present and she was so loving, and there was so many fun things to do, and everybody in my big family got to live down there except for my mom's kids and my mom, because she was going to school and built her life in Grand Junction after school. And my grandma had 14 grandkids, so my mom was one of 4 kids, and the other 3 all raised their families there. One of my aunts didn't really start there. She was raising her kids in like Wyoming and moved around. Her husband was a oil rigger, but eventually, when her youngest, I think, she had 4 boys, and her youngest was like kindergarten, I think, when she maybe got divorced, and they moved to Natarita also. And so her boys kind of finished school there. I think the oldest was maybe middle school. So they spent a lot of time there too. I was always kind of bummed. I had always wished that my mom had went back there and we could have had that support of that family. I never really understood why she didn't. So, because it really seemed like their life it always looked like they had everything they needed. They ate meat, and I know that it was like a big deal that they ate meat because we barely got to eat meat. And it was very cool when we would go, like when we would come back from Natarita, they would fill up coolers and stuff for my mom, because they all hunted, right? My grandparents had this meat house and they all hunted, all my uncles. So they always had plenty of elk and deer. So any meat we did have was elk and deer and stuff like that. My mom would make a lot of roasts when she could. But then when that would run out, we ate bread. And we ate bread from this place where my mom would go, and she would tell them, they're like, this is old moldy bread and we just throw it out. And my mom begged them to quit throwing it in the dumpster and to let her come pick up the load of moldy bread for her cats, she would tell them. So we'd go with my mom and we would get this car full. She had this old station wagon, and we would get this car full of bread that had pieces of mold in it, or like it had gotten smashed, and we would be so excited when this would happen, because we would get like little pastries and stuff, and we would just cut off the bad parts and then maybe microwave it a little bit to make it warm, and then eventually you'd run out of the good sweet ones and it was just left with bread, and we would have like government cheese to put on it, or government peanut butter or whatever. Funny. And anyways, and we had a big chest freezer, and so we would fill that chest freezer with the bread we got from this bread manufacturer, and that is what we survived on, is welfare, government provided. I think they even gave us like big canned pork and stuff, if I remember right. Because this was way before they put government stuff on cards. I think they put it on cards now. And it went from like, they would give you the actual things. And then I think you would get these vouchers. The only reason I remember the vouchers is because I just remember my brother and sister would like beg my mom, can we get something from the store? And she would send them with these vouchers, and they talked about how humiliating they felt it was to have to go to the store. And if one of their friends was there from school or something, they would just put their stuff back and not buy it in front of people, because it was really embarrassing for people to see that you're on, I guess, welfare or food stamps of that time. So I think that's pretty cool that they've come up with cards now for people, because I know we needed that help at that point, So my mom grew out of that, eventually she was able to get off that government help, but I am really grateful that we did have that help back in that time. It was so minimal, and I don't know, somehow she made it work. I don't know. Because we were poor, I got scholarships, and I went to a private Christian school, Baptist, of course. So I was in church on Sunday mornings. It would be Sunday school for an hour, and then after that it was church for an hour, and then we'd leave, and then we'd come back to church Sunday night for Sunday evening church, and then at school on Tuesdays we would go to church for what was called chapel, and Wednesday nights we would go to church for youth group, and then whatever other church activities and school, and that's what I did. That's really what we did. And that was life for me for many years. That's where I had friends, and a couple of my friends from the church. Like at one point, one of the girls from my church went to my school, and that was interesting. I loved her family, especially her mom. Her mom was like this artist that drew all these cards, and they made them like these 3D puffy cards. It was so cool. And she was like the kindest mama, and I just loved her. And I would hang out with their daughter, but their daughter was always so mean. But I loved the mom so much that I had fun with the daughter, but she was always so mean to me. She would always tell me like, oh, I have the brand new American Doll, which they were like very expensive dolls. I couldn't even imagine having a doll that was that expensive. We were so poor. And I remember she came over to my house, And she was like, gross, the paint is peeling off the outside of the house and all this. And so she never wanted to come to my house. She always wanted to go to her house. So sometimes we do like play dates after church. And my mom would be like, well, you have to come to our house this time. And I think like my mom was trying to not always let me be the burden on the other parent. She was trying to take us, but this girl she did not like coming to my house. She was like, you guys are poor and that is disgusting. And it was extremely embarrassing. And it was like, so I just remember feeling so much shame but simultaneously being like, it's totally worth it because her house, like her mom would make us snacks and she played the piano and she was artsy and she would hug me and it was so fun being there. And her dad was kind and they ate at a table, which was so fun. And they talked, and she had this beautiful, kind older sister and this cute little baby sister, and we got along pretty good, as long as I let her get and do whatever she wanted. And I wonder now, looking back, if that's like part of my it became part of me for a while, right? And it's interesting how little things become what we feel is part of us. So that's let's stop there. So we're at like almost 30 minutes, which is probably way too long. I don't know, but that's a little blip into my childhood, or just like kind of overviews of parts of it. I'll come back to stuff and I will definitely expand on my experiences of my time on my grandparents' ranch, which was one of my favorite memories. And then more of the time of my life spent at my mom's house. And yeah. So that's a little about me. And I hope you have an amazing day. And we'll talk soon. And I guess for a bit, we're going to be just like doing this walking through my life biography, but spoken biography. I wonder if there's a word for that. Anyways, I love me and I love you. And see you soon. Ciao.